I'm a 25-year-old guy, and I've been paraplegic since I was 18. An accident changed my life, and now I rely on a custom wheelchair that cost me $2,500. It's not just a chair, it's my independence, my way of getting around, my freedom. My family's always been close, or at least that's how it used to feel. But then there's my cousin Henry, 27, always the jokester, always looking for a laugh. He's the kind of guy who thinks every moment is a setup for his next big prank, no matter how anyone else feels about it. So a few weeks ago, we had this family reunion at my place. I was hosting, which meant dealing with the chaos of my relatives piling into my house. I like seeing everyone, but it's always a lot. And then Henry shows up late, already smelling like he'd had a few too many drinks. He barged in with a goofy grin, loudly making his usual round of jokes. Some of them were all right, others just felt like he was trying too hard, but that's Henry. No one calls him out, and he never seems to notice when his jokes cross a line. It started with little comments. Henry threw out a few quips about how he wished he had a cool ride like mine, gesturing at my wheelchair. Everyone else just laughed awkwardly, shifting in their seats, but I could feel the air in the room change. I tried to shrug it off. This wasn't the first time he'd said stuff like that. But then he decided he needed to get more hands-on with his jokes. Henry strutted over to me, grabbed the handles of my wheelchair, and started pushing me around the room like we were kids playing with a go-kart. He even made engine noises like this was some kind of game. At first I thought he'd stop if I asked. So I told him, hey, cut it out, man. He just laughed louder, saying he was lightening the mood. Nobody else said a word. They just kept glancing around, some trying to pretend like they didn't notice. I looked at my parents, but they just gave me that look that said, just let it go. But I couldn't. So I told Henry again, firmly this time. I wasn't playing around, my chair isn't a toy. Henry smirked like I'd challenged him and said, relax, I'm just messing with you. And then he got it in his head to try something even more ridiculous. He tried to do a wheelie with my chair. Yeah, you read that right. He yanked back on the handles, trying to lift the front wheels off the ground. I shouted at him to stop, but he just kept going. Then, it all went south. He couldn't keep his balance, and the wheelchair tipped. One of the wheels landed hard on the floor with a loud crack. I barely managed to catch myself as I tumbled out of the chair, but my focus immediately snapped to the wheelchair. The right wheel was bent out of shape, the frame was twisted, it was trashed. The room went dead silent, and for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, Henry would realize how badly he'd screwed up. Instead, he just shrugged and said, it's not a big deal. I was just joking around. He didn't even apologize. My face was burning with anger, but all he could see was his own embarrassment. I demanded that he pay for the damage, but he just threw his hands up and said he didn't have that kind of money. Some family members jumped in, trying to play peacemaker. My aunt said, Henry didn't mean it, he just got carried away. My uncle thought I was blowing things out of proportion, saying, you know how Henry is. But this wasn't about how Henry is, this was my mobility, my independence. And now I was stuck using a manual backup wheelchair that's a literal pain to get around in. It's clunky and way harder for me to move around in, but I had no choice. I kept pushing Henry to pay for the repairs, but he just kept saying he couldn't afford it. It became obvious he thought I'd just drop it and move on. But after that night, I couldn't just let it go. A few friends who'd heard the story couldn't believe how Henry acted, and they were the ones who helped me see my options. They pointed out that if Henry wouldn't take responsibility, I could take him to small claims court. At first it sounded extreme, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about the money. It was about holding him accountable for once. So that's what I did. I filed the paperwork to take Henry to small claims court for the $2,500 to cover the cost of a replacement wheelchair. Word spread fast through the family, and the reactions were all over the place. Some said I was taking it too far, that I was going to ruin the family over a stupid mistake. Others, mostly the ones who'd been on the receiving end of Henry's pranks before, thought he finally needed a wake-up call. But for the first time, I didn't care what they thought. I knew I couldn't back down this time. I could tell Henry wasn't taking it seriously, though. He sent me this smug text, something like, you really think a judge is going to side with you over a joke? Good luck with that. It was like he didn't get that this wasn't a game anymore. Well, now he's about to find out just how serious I am. Update 1. So here we are. After the whole wheelchair disaster, I decided to go through with the lawsuit against Henry. Filing it wasn't exactly fun, but it was straightforward. I filled out the paperwork at the local courthouse, listing the damages and the $2,500 I needed to replace my wheelchair. I included everything: repair estimates, details of the incident, and Henry's texts. It felt weird, but I knew it was the right thing to do. There was no way I was letting him get away with this. Not after the way he brushed it off like it was nothing. Word spread fast. My family has always been a bit of a gossip mill, and this time I was right in the middle of it. Reactions were mixed. My mom and dad were trying to stay neutral, but I could tell they weren't thrilled. My aunt, Henry's mom, thought I was overreacting and said so pretty loudly during one family call. But then, a few cousins reached out, privately saying they thought Henry had it coming. They'd been on the receiving end of his jokes too many times before, and they figured this might finally teach him a lesson. Meanwhile, Henry was acting like this whole thing was some sort of joke. He sent me this text, all smug, saying, you're really taking this to court. Good luck with that. I'm sure the judge will side with you over a little accident. He didn't seem to get it. This wasn't about a little accident. It was about respect, accountability, and my ability to get around. But of course he didn't see it that way. I decided to consult with a lawyer friend. I wanted to make sure I had everything lined up right for small claims court. He gave me some tips on how to present my case, making sure I emphasized how much the wheelchair meant to me not just financially but as a key part of my independence. He also suggested I gather as much evidence as I could, anything that would make it clear Henry was at fault and that he'd refused to take responsibility. So, I got to work. I took photos of the damaged wheelchair, the bent wheel, the messed up frame. I pulled together estimates from 2 different repair shops. I even had screenshots of Henry admitting he'd been messing around with the wheelchair, claiming it was just a joke. It wasn't long before I had a whole folder of evidence ready to go. Then came the next round of drama. Henry's mom called me up, trying to play the peacekeeper. She said I should drop the case for family's sake, that taking it to court would only make things worse between us. She tried to guilt trip me, saying I was tearing the family apart over a mistake. But I'd had enough of letting things slide for the sake of family harmony. I told her I wasn't dropping the case, no matter how much they tried to pressure me. Not long after that, things took a turn online. Henry started posting these vague, passive-aggressive comments on social media about some people who'd rather take their own family to court than talk things out. He didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. That set off a chain reaction, with some relatives jumping in to agree with him and others calling him out for not owning up to what he did. It got ugly pretty quickly, with heated comments flying back and forth. Through all of this, the court date finally got set, about a month out. Tensions in the family just kept rising as the date approached. Some people tried to convince me to make peace with Henry, while others were rooting for me to win, saying it was about time someone stood up to him. Henry, on the other hand, wasn't done stirring the pot. A week before the court date, he texted me saying he was planning to countersue for emotional distress. I couldn't believe it. He was actually trying to play the victim here. A few days before the court date, he made one last attempt at a deal. He offered to pay half the repair costs if I agreed to drop the case. It might have sounded like a decent offer to some, but by then it felt like too little, too late. He'd had weeks to take responsibility, and he only made this offer because he was scared of losing in court. I told him I wasn't interested. If he really wanted to make things right, he should have done it weeks ago. The day of the hearing arrived, and it was every bit as tense as I'd expected. Henry and I both brought a few family members for support, though the tension in the waiting area could have cut through glass. We barely made eye contact as we sat on opposite sides of the room, waiting for our turn in front of the judge. When the hearing started, I laid out my evidence. I showed the photos, the repair estimates, and the messages where Henry admitted he'd been fooling around with the wheelchair. I made it clear that this wasn't just about money, it was about the impact on my life, my independence, and how his actions had left me stranded. Henry, when it was his turn, downplayed everything. He kept saying it was an accident, that he didn't mean to cause any damage, and that he thought I was overreacting. The judge listened to both sides, asking a few questions here and there. After what felt like forever, he said he needed more time to review everything before making a decision. He'd issue the ruling in a few days. Walking, or, in my case, rolling out of that courtroom, I couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. But at least I knew one thing: I'd done everything I could to hold Henry accountable. Now, it was up to the judge to decide what would happen next. Update 2. The day of the verdict arrived, and the tension was thick in the air. The courtroom felt almost surreal as I sat in my wheelchair, waiting for the judge to come back with a decision. The gavel banged, and everyone stood as the judge took his seat. He went through the case details quickly, and then he looked up at me, saying he had made a decision. I could feel my heart racing, and the room went silent. The judge ruled in my favor, ordering Henry to pay the full $2,500 for the damage to my wheelchair. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Before I could even process what happened, Henry erupted in the courtroom. His face turned red as he shouted, accusing me of ruining his life over a stupid chair. The bailiff had to step in, telling him to calm down. His outburst echoed in the room, making everyone uneasy. Some family members looked shocked, while others averted their eyes, clearly uncomfortable. As we left the courthouse, it became clear that the family was splitting down the middle. Henry's immediate family rallied around him, claiming I was money-hungry and making a mountain out of a molehill. They didn't care that I'd been left with a damaged wheelchair. All they saw was their son getting in trouble. Meanwhile, some of my relatives started distancing themselves from Henry, expressing disbelief at his behavior. It felt like a high school cafeteria, with social groups forming and breaking apart based on the drama. Henry didn't pay right away, dragging his feet on making the payments. I'd heard through the grapevine that he was trying to come up with excuses, claiming he needed time. Meanwhile, I decided to consult my lawyer friend again. I wanted to know what my options were if Henry didn't pay up. That's when I learned about wage garnishment. I could request to have a portion of Henry's paycheck taken directly to cover the debt. It felt a bit harsh, but at that point I was fed up. I'd done everything right, and it was time for him to face the consequences. I reached out to Henry directly, explaining the situation and letting him know that if he didn't pay, I would have to go through with the garnishment. Almost immediately, he called me, begging for leniency. He claimed he was going through a rough patch and wanted to pay in small installments. It was a tough spot. Part of me wanted to show him some mercy, but I also knew I had to stand my ground. After a long discussion, I reluctantly agreed to a payment plan, hoping this would finally put an end to the drama. The first 2 payments came and went, but Henry missed them both. It wasn't a surprise, really. I had a feeling he'd take the easy route and try to avoid responsibility again. After the second missed payment, I had enough. I went through with the garnishment process. When I told Henry, he lost it. He ranted about how unfair it was, claiming I was ruining him financially. I felt a mix of satisfaction and regret as I processed it all. It was a step towards getting my money back, but it also felt like I was pushing him further down a dark path. Social media became the next battlefield. Henry took to his accounts, posting rants that twisted the story in his favor. He painted himself as the victim, saying I was out for blood over a simple mistake. Those posts ignited a firestorm. Family members and friends jumped into the comments, some defending him and others standing by me. The online debates escalated quickly, with people choosing sides, and it felt like a mini civil war within the family. Feeling the need to set the record straight, I crafted a post outlining everything that had happened, the incident, the court case, and how Henry had refused to pay. I made sure to share the evidence, the texts, and the ruling. It wasn't long before my post gained traction, receiving supportive comments from people who hadn't realized the full extent of Henry's behavior. They expressed their disbelief that he thought it was acceptable to treat me the way he had. It felt good to finally have my side heard, even if it was just online. Meanwhile, back in real life, the fallout was real. Some family members reached out, apologizing for not understanding the situation better. They admitted they hadn't realized how far Henry's pranks had gone or how deeply they affected me. It was a relief to hear, but it also highlighted how divided our family had become. As time passed, I started hearing rumors that Henry had lost his job. Some said it was partly due to the wage garnishment and his online behavior. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. It felt strange knowing my actions had contributed to his struggles, even if he brought it all on himself. I had won the battle, but it left me questioning whether it was worth it. Henry's mom reached out to me, pleading for a family mediation session. She thought it would be a good idea for everyone to sit down and talk things out. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to make amends at this point. It felt like a lot of drama and hurt had already built up, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go through it all again. As I weighed my options, the family dynamic shifted even more. Some relatives sided with Henry, insisting that he deserved support in his time of need. Others, however, started showing more support for me, realizing that standing up for myself was necessary. The whole situation had become a tangled web of emotions and alliances. I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over yet. The courtroom drama had just begun, and I was still standing my ground. Update 3. After everything that had happened, my family's dynamics had taken a serious hit. The rift between Henry and me seemed to stretch further every day. To help ease the tension, I reluctantly agreed to a family mediation meeting. I figured it might help clear the air and hopefully lead to some understanding. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at my aunt's house, and I arrived with a mix of hope and apprehension. As I rolled into the living room, I saw Henry sitting on the couch with his arms crossed. He looked annoyed, and I could tell he wasn't excited about this either. My relatives filled the room, some with supportive smiles, others with awkward expressions. The air felt thick, like everyone knew we were walking a tightrope. When the meeting officially began, Henry started off by offering an apology. It came out as a half-hearted attempt, almost as if he was just checking a box. "I'm sorry for what happened," he said, but the way he said it made it sound more like a chore than a genuine expression of remorse. The room fell silent, and I could see some family members exchanging glances, unsure of how to react. I took a deep breath, deciding it was time to address the elephant in the room. I explained how Henry's actions had impacted me, how he had crossed boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. I made it clear that this wasn't just about the money. It was about respect and accountability. The room felt heavy with tension as I spoke, and a few relatives nodded along, but Henry just rolled his eyes. The discussion quickly escalated into a tense debate. Some family members urged me to forgive Henry for the sake of family unity. They claimed holding on to this grudge was only tearing us apart more. I listened to their arguments, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't fully understand what had happened. Henry had hurt me in ways that went beyond the financial damage. In his typical style, Henry jumped in with empty promises, saying he would pay the remaining balance soon. It sounded familiar, like a script I had already heard multiple times. I told him it was hard to believe anything he said anymore. The trust was gone, and I could no longer see him as someone who would keep his word. His frustration bubbled over, and he stood up abruptly. "You're the one tearing this family apart," he yelled, storming out of the room. His voice echoed down the hallway as he slammed the door behind him. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Some relatives looked uncomfortable, while others seemed to agree with me, nodding in quiet understanding. After he left, a few family members came up to me privately. They expressed their support, acknowledging that Henry had crossed a line with his actions. One cousin said they had seen Henry's behavior go too far before but hadn't known how to address it. It was comforting to know that not everyone was on Henry's side, but it also felt bittersweet. The family I had once felt close to was now divided. As the weeks went by, I took a step back to reflect on everything that had happened. This situation had changed my view of my family. It was eye-opening to see how quickly lines could be drawn based on loyalty and denial. I realized that some relationships might never return to what they once were, and I had to be okay with that. In the meantime, I focused on my own life. I continued pursuing my hobbies, finding solace in photography and connecting with friends outside of my family. It felt good to reclaim some independence and to build a life that wasn't overshadowed by family drama. I found myself exploring new opportunities and looking into upgrading my wheelchair to something more advanced, which would improve my mobility and independence. Henry, however, wasn't done trying. A few weeks after the mediation meeting, I received a long email from him. He was reaching out, attempting another reconciliation. He expressed regret about how things had gone down and claimed he wanted to make amends. I considered his words but decided not to respond. It felt like a cycle I was no longer interested in participating in. The trust was gone, and I didn't want to reopen that door. Henry continued to miss payments on the agreed plan, but the garnishment kept trickling in, slowly but surely. I didn't want to feel satisfaction in his struggles, but it was hard to ignore the irony. He had made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences. Family gatherings remained tense. Whenever there was a celebration, people would whisper and shift awkwardly whenever Henry was mentioned. The divide was palpable, and it seemed everyone was aware of it. I often found myself wondering how long it would take before we could all just move past this. But deep down, I understood that some things might never go back to normal. Despite the ongoing family drama, I found a sense of closure knowing I had stood up for myself. I had taken a stand, faced my fears, and demanded respect. I felt empowered by the experience, even if it came with a heavy dose of family conflict. As I looked to the future, I realized it was time for new beginnings. I began researching better wheelchairs that could enhance my mobility. I wanted something that would not just be a tool for getting around, but a symbol of my independence. It felt good to plan for something positive, to focus on my journey rather than getting stuck in the past. With every passing day, I felt lighter. I was moving forward, ready to embrace whatever came next. The road ahead might be rocky, but I was determined to navigate it on my own terms. Family drama or not, my life was mine to shape, and I was ready for the next chapter. Update 4. Things took a surprising turn one rainy afternoon when there was a knock at my door. I rolled over to answer it, expecting maybe a neighbor or a delivery person. Instead, there stood Henry, looking unkempt and desperate. His clothes were wrinkled, and his hair was a mess. It was clear he hadn't been taking care of himself, and the expression on his face told me something was wrong. Henry didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, practically collapsing onto the couch. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice shaky. I raised an eyebrow, not sure what to expect. After everything that had happened, I was taken aback by his sudden appearance. He took a deep breath, then launched into an unexpected plea. Henry revealed that he was in serious debt and facing eviction. He looked up at me, eyes wide and pleading. "I need a loan," he said, the words hanging in the air between us. I was stunned. After everything we had been through, he was asking me for money? It felt like the ultimate slap in the face. Trying to process this, I listened as he continued. He admitted he had been struggling with depression since the court case, feeling like everyone was against him, including me. The more he spoke, the more I felt torn. I couldn't deny that part of me felt some sympathy for him, but the other part screamed that he had brought this on himself. I had no obligation to help him after everything he had done. As he sat there, visibly shaking, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I consulted my friends about the situation, and their opinions were split. Some thought I should extend a hand, saying everyone deserves a second chance, while others warned me against getting involved again. They reminded me of the past and how he had manipulated our family dynamics. Meanwhile, my parents caught wind of Henry's situation. They pushed me to help him out, claiming that family should always support each other in tough times. It felt like they didn't understand the weight of what Henry had done and how much it affected me. I was left wrestling with my conscience. On one hand, I wanted to show some empathy. On the other, I didn't want to get hurt again. Then, one evening, Henry broke down in tears in my living room. He poured out his heart, confessing how much he regretted his actions and how he felt completely alone. Seeing him like that was unsettling. He seemed like a different person from the cocky cousin I had known. But there was still a voice in the back of my head reminding me of everything he had put me through. After much consideration, I decided to offer him a compromise. I told him he could stay with me for a week, but I made it clear it wasn't alone. I needed to set boundaries, and I wasn't going to risk my peace of mind by letting him think I would just give him money again. He agreed, relief washing over his face as he thanked me repeatedly. The first few days were filled with uneasy coexistence. Having Henry in my space felt strange. He occupied the guest room, and I often heard him moving around at odd hours. While he tried to make small talk, the tension between us was palpable. It was like walking on eggshells. I was constantly aware of our past and how fragile this new arrangement felt. Then, slowly, I began to notice some changes. Henry started taking steps to improve his situation. He reached out to a therapist and applied for new jobs, which was a positive sign. It felt like a glimmer of hope, and I wanted to believe that he was genuinely trying to turn things around. However, old habits die hard. One afternoon, as we sat together watching TV, he made an offhand joke about the court case, something I hadn't expected him to bring up. The comment hit me like a punch to the gut, reigniting old anger that I thought I had put behind me. I felt the frustration bubbling up inside me again, remembering all the pain he had caused. It was a stark reminder that he hadn't truly changed, and I couldn't ignore that. That evening, I confronted him. I explained that his joke wasn't funny, and that it reminded me of everything that had happened. Henry seemed taken aback, his expression shifting from confusion to defensiveness. He claimed he was just trying to lighten the mood, but I wasn't having it. It was the final straw for me. I realized that despite my attempts to help him, some things were never going to change. Feeling a mix of anger and disappointment, I asked him to leave. I told him I had given him a chance, but he had wasted it. I explained that I couldn't continue living in a space where I felt uncomfortable and disrespected. Henry stood up, looking stunned. He opened his mouth to argue, but then just turned and left without saying another word. As he walked out, I felt a rush of relief. I had done what I thought was best for myself. Henry's departure marked a turning point for me. I could finally breathe again, knowing I had set boundaries that needed to be in place. After he left, I took some time to reflect on everything. I knew I had given him a fair chance to make amends, but I also understood that I had to protect myself. The entire situation had been exhausting, and I felt empowered by the decision I had made. Though the family dynamics were still strained, I was ready to focus on my own life again. I started looking deeper into my plans for a new wheelchair, exploring different options that would give me more independence. I felt determined to move forward, leaving the past behind me and stepping into a brighter future. With each day, I felt lighter, knowing I had made the right choice for myself. Update 5. The dust had settled after everything with Henry, and I found myself reflecting on the journey. Looking back, I realized how much I had grown through this entire ordeal. The anger and hurt from the past still lingered, but they didn't control me anymore. I had learned the importance of standing up for myself, setting boundaries, and understanding that family doesn't always mean unconditional support. With the emotional weight lifting, new opportunities began to appear. I received a call from a local magazine offering me a freelance photography project. They wanted someone to travel and capture events in different cities for an upcoming feature on accessibility for disabled individuals. The chance to combine my passion for photography with travel was a welcome distraction from the family drama. I jumped at the opportunity, excited to step out of my routine and explore new places. As I prepared for the project, I also felt a strong desire to give back. I started volunteering at a local organization dedicated to helping disabled people find employment and build community connections. Working with others who face similar challenges filled me with a sense of fulfillment. I listened to their stories, helped them navigate the job market, and offered support where I could. It was refreshing to be part of something positive, and I found a renewed sense of purpose in helping others. Meanwhile, I began to hear about Henry's life. Through mutual family members and friends, I learned that things had not improved for him. He struggled to find work and had become even more isolated. The chaos of his past decisions weighed heavily on him, and the fallout from our family drama continued to ripple through his life. Although part of me felt a pang of sympathy, I also felt detached. I had moved on and I couldn't allow myself to be dragged back into his turmoil. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call. It was Henry. His voice sounded different, quieter, almost humble. He started by saying he wanted to apologize. He claimed he had been sober for 3 months and was working hard to turn his life around. Hearing him say that felt surreal. After everything, I never expected him to reach out again, let alone admit his struggles. I listened as he explained his situation, expressing genuine regret for how he had treated me and our family. I acknowledged his apology but kept my distance. I made it clear that I appreciated his effort to change, but I couldn't just forget the past. It was important for me to protect my peace, and I wasn't ready to trust him again. Henry understood and accepted my decision. He mentioned that he was finally getting his finances in order, and I heard a hint of hope in his voice. A few weeks later, he followed through by paying the remaining balance he owed me from the court ruling. It was a small but significant gesture, a step toward taking responsibility for his actions. I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure knowing that part of our story had come to an end. With that payment, I decided to buy a new, upgraded wheelchair. It was something I had been dreaming about for a while, a symbol of my independence and a fresh start. The day it arrived was filled with excitement. I rolled around the house, testing its features and marveling at how much easier it was to maneuver. It represented everything I had fought for and the progress I had made in my life. Despite the positive changes in my life, the family remained divided. Some relatives stayed neutral, while others distanced themselves from both Henry and me. Family gatherings became awkward, with an unspoken tension hanging over them. I wondered if things would ever go back to a semblance of normalcy. As time went on, I found healing in the midst of the rift. I felt lighter and more at peace with my decision to take Henry to court. It had been a necessary step for my well-being, and I knew I had done the right thing. To share my journey, I decided to post a final update online. I detailed the events that had unfolded, emphasizing the importance of standing up for oneself and the lessons I learned through it all. The response was overwhelming. My post gained traction, with supportive comments pouring in from strangers who resonated with my story. Many shared their own experiences with difficult family dynamics and how they had navigated similar situations. Reading those comments helped me feel less alone. It reminded me that while family can be complicated, finding strength in oneself is what truly matters. With the drama behind me, I began reconnecting with old friends. I reached out to people I had lost touch with during the chaos, and the responses were heartwarming. We met up, laughed, and reminisced about old times. Those moments of connection were just what I needed to feel grounded again. As I moved forward, I started saving up for a potential road trip. I dreamed of visiting places I had always wanted to see, national parks, historic landmarks, and beautiful coastlines. The idea of exploring new horizons filled me with excitement. In the end, I felt ready to let go of the past. I had learned that I could create my own path, regardless of the challenges that came my way. Each step I took brought me closer to my own happiness and independence. With my new wheelchair, supportive friends, and newfound purpose, I stepped into this new chapter of life with hope and determination, ready for whatever adventures awaited.